And welcome, and we'll start off with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And I will go to the share. Okay. And I'm going to hope that it's big enough again now. Let's see. Okay. So remember, we're in the midst of the Israelites complaining, starting the many times that they're going to complain to Moses. And I think it's such a fundamental kind of lesson to us and our own personal narratives, and whether our narratives involve complaining or whether our narratives involve seeing all the blessings that actually come our way. And especially if we've experienced adversity and then we don't experience adversity in those precise situations. So, and sometimes they're very simple kinds of things. So, for example, losing something and then finding it, or knowing you need something and not really remembering where you put it, but sort of finding it immediately. Those are like little blessings, but they're not so little, because when you lose something and you need it, it's very frustrating. So again, the whole point about the complaints, they make a big deal out of this. And of course, ultimately, they wind up not being able to make it to the land of Israel. So I think there's a huge, huge message here about trying to hear ourselves and to hear our narratives and to recognize if we need to change those narratives. So God is speaking to Moses. He's telling them that Moses is telling God he cannot handle it anymore. He cannot. It's just too much. And God is telling him to go ahead and find 70 other men to help him whom he knows and can rely on. So this is going on with it. Vayaradati, I shall descend. This is God speaking. Vedibarti, this should be a dot in there. Vedibarti imcha, I shall speak to you, Sham, there. Va'atzalti min haruach, and I shall increase from the spirit, asher alecha, which is upon you. And we're talking here about the spirit of prophecy. So when they talk about the divine spirit, usually that is what they're referring to. It is the ability to be able to prophesy. V'samti alehem, and I shall place it upon you. V'nasu itcha, and they shall carry with you the ha'am, in the burden of the people. V'lo tisa'ata levadecha, so that you shall not have to bear it upon yourself, by yourself. You shouldn't have to bear it by yourself. So, see, interesting, beautiful, actually, very beautiful ideas here. First of all, of course, we know this is not the first time that the idea of not doing it by yourself, of not being a sole dictator, is mentioned. Of course, we had it with Jethro, with Moses' father-in-law, and now we're seeing that Moses himself just cannot handle the situation. Vayaradati, I shall come down, right? I shall descend. Zo'achat me'eseri dot. So this is simply one of 10 descents, aktuvot b'Torah, which are mentioned in the Torah. So, for example, with Sodom and Gomorrah, it talks about how God is going to descend to see what's going on there in those cities. But here he is going to do it. It's interesting, the idea of God's presence and taking some of what Moses has and sharing it with these other elders. V'dibarti imach v'lo imahim. So the question is, what do you mean? Why does it say, I'm going to speak to you? V'lo imahim, I'm not going to speak to the counselors that you've appointed. The idea being that if this wasn't mentioned, if this did not make this point here, we would think that possibly the other people would have a similar level of communication with God, with divine communication as Moses. So this is very clear that it's only with Moses that God is going to speak in this particular way. V'atzalti. So he says ketargumo. So this word va'atzalti is not a common word, but here it is in Aramaic. This is how Onkelos translates it. So it means I will increase. I will increase. So he says ketargumo, just as Onkelos has translated it for RB, and he's giving you the Onkelos word. Kamo, and he gives another example in Exodus Shemot, Hafdalah 24, and it says, the El Atzile Bnei Yisrael, and it says, to the distinguished amongst the children of Israel. In other words, these selected people, right? So adding grandeur to these individuals. Besamti Alehem, and I will place upon them. Lema Moshe Domeh, but Sha'ah. To what could Moses be compared to at this moment, at that moment? L'ner, to a lamp, shemunach al gabe menorah, or to a flame that is placed on top of a menorah, on top of a candlestick. Va'akol madlikim hemenu, and everyone is able to light, to kindle their lamps from it. Ve'ein oro chaser klum, but there's nothing that is less of its own light. It doesn't lack any of its own light, and that's the v'atzalti. V'nasu itcha. So incidentally, there's a point here that when Moses is, well, is he complaining or is he venting? Or is he just expressing the frustration that is understandable at the moment? But certainly he is nothing, you don't see here that God is punishing him in any kind of way. In fact, God is taking a very positive and helpful stand over it. V'nasu itcha, and they shall carry with you. Hitna imahem. So he made a condition with them, al manat she'ikablu alehem, that they, in order to attain this particular position, they had to accept upon themselves, they had to accept torach b'nei banai. They need to accept upon themselves the burden of my sons. Shehem tarchanim, because they are troublesome, they're burdensome, v'sarvanim, and they're obstinate and they're rebellious. So this is the nature of things, right? Obstinate, stubborn, rebellious, troublesome, etc. V'lo tisa atalabadecha, and you shall not have to bear the burden all by yourself. Harei tshuva, this is a response, l'masha amarta, to what you, Moses, said, lo uchal anuchi levadi, I am unable by myself. So, next verse, ve'el ha'am tomar, and to the people you shall say, hitkadshu lemachar, prepare yourselves for tomorrow, va'achaltem basar, and you shall consume meat, ki bechitim beoznai, because you cried in my ears, Hashem, bechitim beoznei Hashem, because you have cried in God's hearing, or in God's ears, literally. Lemor, saying, Mi ya'achileni le'achilenu basar, who can give us meat to eat? Ki tov lanu b'Mitzrayim, because it was better for us in Egypt. V'natan Hashem lachem basar v'achaltem. This is Moses, of course, saying this, and the Lord will give you meat and you will consume it. So, of course, the worst thing they said was that things were better for them in Egypt, and because they were hungry for meat and they weren't able to get meat. And of course, there's quite a bit of psychology going on here in terms of human nature. But that was the most insulting. Of course, the way you would sort of get at God would be to say, it was better in Egypt. In other words, this miracle, this amazing freeing from Egyptian slavery is nothing. In fact, I wish you hadn't done it. It's such a mean-spirited response. So, hitkadshu, And as you see, I didn't say sanctify yourselves, but prepare yourselves. And that's how Rashi explains it. He's minu atzmachem, prepare yourselves, lefuranut, that you're going to be punished. Prepare yourself for punishment. V'chein hu omer, and the same expression is used in Jeremiah chapter 12. V'hikdisham liyom harega, and prepare them for the day of slaughter. Next verse. So, okay, sounds like good news. They're going to get meat to eat. But here we go. Take a look at this next verse. Lo yom echad tochlun. You won't just eat it for one day. Velo yomayim, nor for 2 days. Velo chamisha yamim, nor for 5 days. Velo asara yamim, nor 10 days. Velo isrim yom, and not even for 20 days. And I'll take the next verse. There's no Rashi on this. Ad chodesh yamim, until a month of days. In other words, you're going to be eating meat for the next 30 days. Ad asher yetzeh me'apchem, to a point where literally it means it'll go out of your noses, out of your nostrils. In other words, you'll be disgusted. You're going to have so much of it. V'haya lachem lazara, and it will become offensive to you. Ya'an ki ma'astem, because on account, this ya'an is sort of like the prophetic ya'an, on account of, because, ki ma'astem, because you rejected, you spurned, et Hashem, the Lord, you actually spurned God, asher berkichem, who is in your midst, v'tivku lefanav lemor, and you cried before him, saying, Lama ze yatzanu mimitzrayim. Why did we go out of Egypt? And as I said, that was the really mean thing that the Israelites said. It couldn't be any more insulting. Rashi. Ad chodesh yamim, up till a month of days. Zo b'ksherim, so it says the month, in other words, the fact that they would be able to consume it for a month, that refers to the people who were basically decent people, shemit matzin al mitotehem, who were wrung out on their beds. So in a sense, it means they were suffering. V'achar, and after that process, nishmatan yotzah, and after that, their soul departs. And so there's an assumption here that whatever tribulations they were going through in that next month was actually an atonement for them. And there's a general understanding of seeing suffering in that particular light. And possibly it's a way of trying to accept it a little bit better. At any rate, Urishaim, but with the wicked ones, who Omer, that is going to be said later on when it's going to describe what happens. Habasar odenu ben shinehem, the meat was barely between their teeth. Kach, in other words, that their souls departed. They'd barely eaten a bit. So of course there's a contradiction going on here, and that's how you harmonize the contradiction. Kach hishnuya b'sifrei, and that's the explanation given in the Sifrei. Aval b'mechilta, but in a different midrash, early midrash, actually this is also a halachic midrash on Exodus, shnuya chiluf, it's taught in the opposite way. Harishaim ochlim umitztarin, the wicked ones eat and then they suffer, shloshim yom, for 30 days. But with regards to people that were kosher, in other words, were basically acceptable, Abasar Odena ben Shinehem, they died quickly. They barely had a chance to eat it when their souls departed. Adashir Yatzame Pe'apchem, until the point where it comes out of your nostrils. Ketargumo, and this follows the way Onkelos translates this in Aramaic, di tekutsun be, up to the point where you find it disgusting. Yehei domeh lachem. It's going to appear to you as ke'ilu, as if achaltem mimenu yoter midai, as if you've eaten so much of it, just way too much of it, ad sheyotzeh v'nig'al lachutz, up until a point where it will come out and be ejected out from you, derech ha'af, through the nose, that you've eaten so much of it. It's obviously a very descriptive way of saying, how they're going to overeat to a point of getting sick over it. V'haya lachem lazara. So you're going to find this defensive. Shetiyu merachkin oto yoter mima. That is to say, you're going to try and put it away from you. You're going to try and set it away from you. Yoter mima shikaravtem, more than you desired to have it. The degree to which you're going to be disgusted with the meat is going to be greater than the amount that you wanted to bring it, wanted to have it. Uvidivrei Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan, and in the words of Rabbi Moses, the interpreter, we've had him, Rashi mention this. I assume he was either a contemporary or he had written a book that Rashi was aware of. Ra'iti, I saw, sheyesh makom shekorin lecherev zara, that there are places where a sword is referred to as a zara. That's the word that's used for a sword. So, in other words, where it says lachem lazara, in other words, that it shall be to you like a sword, like a sword. Et Hashem asher bechem, the Lord who is in your midst. Im lo shenatati shchinati beinechem, were it not for the fact that I implanted my presence amongst you, lo gava levavchem, you would never have become arrogant. Your hearts wouldn't have become arrogant. Likanes lechol advarim halalu, so as to go into these things. In other words, to express yourselves in this way, that the fact that you were brought up high made you arrogant. Vayomer Moshe, and Moses said, Shesh me'ot elef ragli, there are 600,000 foot soldiers that make up the nation, asher anochi bekirbo, in whom I'm in their midst. V'ata amarta basar etelahem, and you say I will give them meat, v'achlu chodesh yamim, and that they're going to eat it for a month. So there's going to be a lot of commentary here. Let's go on. Okay, but we have a short one here. Shesh me'ot elef ragli. So it says 600,000 foot soldiers, and of course we just had the counting. We had the census taken, and there were more than 600,000. Lo chash limnot et haprat shlosha alafim hayajarim. He did not take into consideration. He wasn't worried about the 3,000 additional who were part of that count. In other words, there were 603,000 when they took the census, but he didn't feel a need to take that detail into account. For Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan, and we have another reference to Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan, Piresh, he explains, Shelo bachu ela atan shiatzu Mitzrayim, that the only ones who were weeping were those who had actually come out of Egypt. Why? Because they're the ones who said that it would have been better had we stayed there. And the other ones were born later on after they'd come out of Egypt. In other words, 3,000, those 3,000 were born after they'd come out of Egypt. So they were not the ones who said it was better for us in Egypt. And that's where we're going to leave things for today. Any comments for the record?
What was the age of the Israelites? Were they 20 years and above?
Yeah, we'd have to. The ones that were complaining would have been that age. Yes. Yes.
Oh. did they cook their animals, or did they eat them raw?
So, sorry, here we go. Let me try this. I think it may mention that. I'm not sure. I don't think they necessarily ate it raw. It may be a detail that's not mentioned and just understood. So, yeah. Anyway, that's the story for today, to be continued.